Pigweed here. Today we review an IPA and discuss historical juxtapositions. Well, hello, hello.
Good evening, Pigweed.
Good evening to you.
How about some beer and conversation?
I think that's a great idea.
All right.
What are we drinking?
So, this is a piney seasonal from Dogfish Head. It's called Covered in Nugs. I'm not sure what nugs. What does nugs have to do with it? But it's supposed to be a very piney, citrusy, heady kind of a IPA. So let's see what we got.
Okay, yeah, because I think go ahead and try it. The categories tend to be earthy, piney, citrusy.
Yeah.
And this is suggesting some
I'm
pininess.
getting more piney than citrusy. I made a beer using cuttings from a Christmas tree a long time ago. It was delicious.
Yeah.
And I need to redo that because
I made one. It was supposed to be. It was like a colonial ale.
Yeah.
The idea being, you don't really have hops back in the day, and so this is one of the things they did. Was,
sure.
Yeah, I went by and snipped off some neighbors. Fresh up.
You want fresh growth.
You do, right? You want spring.
Yeah. So cutting off pieces of the Christmas tree isn't the ideal way to do it.
Yeah. Right.
You're supposed to get the fresh growth in the spring, but still, he was good.
Okay, very good.
So this is a very, very piney IPA, I will say. All right, so did you say juxtaposition? What's a historical juxtaposition?
Well, I came across these interesting facts, like historical events that you wouldn't necessarily associate with one another.
Okay, yeah.
Or a timeline that a historical timeline that might not readily come to mind.
Yeah.
And I thought we would go through some of these and discuss, say what you got to say.
Okay, all right, very good.
So I'll start.
Okay.
George Washington never knew dinosaurs existed, as he died in 1799, and the first dinosaur fossil was discovered in 1824, and I just thought that was funny. The idea of thinking about George Washington and dinosaurs at the same time just is weird.
Now, the thing that immediately came to my mind was certainly people had dug up dinosaur bones before 1824.
I'm thinking that it might be the origin of belief in dragons.
Yeah, dragons and giants and things like that.
And giants, yeah.
So I think the truth of the matter was people had dug up such bones. They just didn't have any context for them. So they thought they were dragons, they thought they were giants, they thought who knows what they thought. But it wasn't until 1824 that we had kind of the scientific context to say these are dinosaur bones.
Yes, that there was a species that existed long before human beings did and died out and that kind of right. Those thoughts weren't really around during George's day.
Right. And then the dinosaur fossil that was discovered in 1824 was a megalosaurus, by the way.
All right. Well, that's that you wouldn't mistake that for anything that was walking around. It wasn't like a big cow or anything.
That's right. Yeah. Apparently, in China, they did think they were dragons when they found these big bones. Which I know. Why not?
Of course.
Seems to make sense. How about this? Sharks are older than trees. Not any individual shark, of course.
Yes, and maybe in your geological background, mind might not be surprised by that, but to me, that seems. Yeah, I just wouldn't thought of that as happening that way.
Yeah, so sharks...
All life...
They've been around for a long time.
So all life was aquatic before there was land life of any kind. Even grasses, you're saying?
Yes. Oh, yeah, grasses are late. So, yeah,
the planet is... So it's just dirt and a thriving water life.
Well, I wouldn't say it was just dirt, because there could have been... bacteria and other single cell or multi-celled, slimes,
maybe
and other
some
kinds
algae
of
or
that kind of
mossy
junk.
stuff.
Yeah, I'm not sure. But moss might be much later, but yeah, some kind of slimy, messy junk like that was probably on the land.
So give me some numbers for these.
Yeah, so sharks have been around for 450 million years. And they've survived the mass extinctions. There have been 5 mass extinctions since then, and they survived.
It's just right. It was just like they they came up with this design 450 million years ago and said, why mess with it?
I know, it's working.
Later on, if it needs to adapt, it will, but didn't need to.
Yeah. So sharks have a cartilaginous skeleton, which means it's made of cartilage, not bone.
Huh.
So when you find a shark skeleton, really all you find is the teeth, the jaws and the teeth. You don't get a lot of bones out of a shark because it has all of this cartilage.
Right.
And has a lot of benefits. It's lightweight and it's flexible. It contributes to buoyancy, which saves their energy when swimming. Mm-hmm. It's more flexible, which allows them to capture prey and evade predators. It's low maintenance. It requires less metabolic energy to manage. It grows faster. It's shock absorbent. It has a lot of benefits. The big drawback is that you have to have a whole lot more muscle to compensate for the cartilage.
Okay.
So sharks are like really strong.
And as long as they have plenty of food source, why mess with the design?
That's right. Yeah. If it's working, then keep doing it. Yeah.
All right. How about this one? This is more of a timeline situation here. The 10th president of the United States. What are we up to now?
John Tyler.
47?
47 is going to be Trump.
Yeah. So we're going way back. Mm-hmm. Born in 1790. Mm. All right? Mm-hmm. This is a long, long time ago.
Yes.
His grandson is alive.
Isn't that weird? Seems hard to believe.
So he had a son at age 65. So that helps increase the gap.
Right. Yeah.
And then that son had a child very late in life. And that child lived a very long time. He's 94 years old. My grandfather was born in 1900.
Yeah.
17. What did I say?
1790. 110 years before your grandfather was born.
Right.
Yeah.
It's still a grandfather.
Yeah. That's pretty amazing.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too. My grandfather was born around the same time, or early 1900s. Right. So woolly mammoths were still around when the Egyptians built the pyramids.
Right, so this is a great picture here of woolly mammoth standing by the pyramid,
which is not right. They did survive, but they survived on this tiny little island, Wrangel Island in the Arctic Ocean.
Oh, that was the
last stand of the woolly mammoths, and they were there around 4,000 years ago. They weren't walking around.
They weren't in Egypt, but just the juxtaposition, the idea that these two things were happening at the same time.
Because when you think of woolly mammoths, you think of like the Flintstones and way back caveman kind of stuff. You don't think of these guys.
What about the Oregon Trail?
Right.
In 1843. Is the year that the fax machine was invented?
That just seems so hard to believe. Because the Oregon Trail, you picture the Conestoga wagons. And, these settlers
completely
out
unsettled West.
Yeah, and all this low technology stuff. And the fax machine?
Seems like it's something from the 80s.
Yeah, right. The fax machine was around in that time? I don't know.
I don't know.
Seems kind of hard to believe.
I
don't have any other facts on that one.
That's weird.
Now, here's another one. The University of Oxford is older than the Aztec Empire.
See, now that's nuts.
Yeah.
I like that one there. That is, you just would not associate those two things. Aztec Empire.
So, the Aztec Empire was founded in 1325. Which, when I think of the Aztecs, I think of them as being older than that. I think of them as being way back. But they're really not all that way. They were just there for a little while before the Spaniards arrived.
Yes, and when you go to Mexico City, and as a tourist, you're going to go out to Tenochtitlan, which is those big pyramids, and you can do this series of pyramids with a giant pyramid at the end, and that was already there when the Aztecs got there.
Okay,
and they don't even know where they came from, and they lived on Mexico, what is now Mexico City.
Yeah,
that was still like a ceremonial city that out in the suburbs that they would go to at times. So there was already you kind of associate them with that culture.
Yeah.
Yet they came in much later and they didn't even know who built them.
So when I read 1491, which is, what the Americas were like before Columbus arrived, one of the things it mentions is that the Americas were way more populated than we used to think. And that South America, and particularly the Amazon, was much more cultivated than we like to think. We like to think of the Amazon as being this pristine rainforest. it's really not.
Right, they were just living off the land. And...
Yeah, exactly. But no, they had cultivated it such that certain areas of the Amazon, there were little squares, and in each square they had certain plants that they would plant, and then they would use the waterways between the squares as like roads and stuff.
Yeah, and they probably burned the forest down to get the to get the land, right?
Yeah. So just recently they use LiDAR. What's that? Some sort of a sideways radar kind of a thing, and they've been using that to map out things in the Amazon, and they're finding evidence of these old settlements in the rainforest that have been there for quite a long time.
Right, so they not like the the Amazonian Indians that you find there now, who are really just subsistence living.
And they don't have much to go by. So now, why was Oxford University established? Henry II banned English students from attending the University of Paris.
Really?
And that's what got Oxford a big bump.
Right, and what's our year for the first year of Oxford?
Well, the University of Bologna was founded in 1088. That's the oldest. And then Oxford was, I don't have a number
1096.
1096. Okay.
So not only was it before,
but it was hundreds of years.
It was 300 years before.
Yeah, it was a long time before. That's pretty impressive.
That is pretty good. So what about number 8? The guillotine was still France's official execution method when Star Wars debuted.
That's a great juxtaposition.
That is a good one there.
Because the guillotine seems so primitive.
It seems so French Revolution, and you figure that was just this bloody thing that they came up with, to kill off all the nobles.
Right.
But no, they used it right up until 1977.
Oh, I heard it was 81, actually. Well, they abolished the death penalty in 81. So maybe the last time they used it was 77.
Okay, yes. That what I have is the last state-sanctioned guillotine execution was 1977, which really, we're so worried about the humaneness of the ways that we keep coming up with new concoctions.
Yeah.
And you try to, you try to execute a guy and you just set his hair on fire, and you keep bungling the.
Yeah.
What's
so wrong with guillotine?
Except for the guy who has to do the cleanup afterwards.
Yeah. But think about it.
We can figure it out.
Would you rather be hanged, shot, electrocuted, lethal injection, or guillotined?
Yeah.
I think I'd rather be guillotined.
It seems pretty quick.
I know.
You
don't know what the head suffers after it gets chopped off. It might sit there for a minute and think, boy, this sucks.
I have heard that there's some gnawing going on in the basket of where the heads drop off. So there might be, you're not going to be screaming, you have no lungs, but you might be some gnawing.
There might still be some cognitive function going on there.
So that would be terrifying. But very briefly, and even if you were firing squad, you have to expect somebody's going to hit your heart and explode it, but maybe not. You know what I mean? Yeah. Maybe if you're off by a couple of centimeters here and there, you just
get shot and then you lay there and bleed to death. It's a horrible thing.
It's really not that inhumane.
Yeah, it's difficult. So the Eastern Roman Empire. Remember, kids, that the Roman Empire split east and west. The Eastern Roman Empire fell only 40 years before Christopher Columbus landed in the Americas.
Yeah.
This means that plenty of people who considered themselves Romans heard of the discovery of the New World.
Yeah, that's pretty nuts because, yes, you're right. We don't think of the split because the Western fell in the 400s.
Yeah.
So, you kind of... So Italy... which is where Rome is, where you think of the Romans, right? That part fell in the 400s. But the Byzantines, who called themselves Romans, were there for 1,000 years.
Yeah, but I think the other reason we don't think of them as Romans is because when you picture what the Byzantines wore, it doesn't look anything like what the Romans wore. When we think of Romans, we picture a certain style of dress and the kinds of armor and stuff that they wore and the togas and all that kind of junk.
Right.
And the Byzantines didn't wear anything like that.
Things evolved, and so...
Yeah, right. It's 1,000 years later. So you'd think that dress would change a little bit over that amount of time.
Yeah, and you also think of... You look at that region, you go, well, that's Turkey. You know what I mean? So it's hard it's hard. You don't think of Romans being there, but the Turks came much later.
Yes.
They came from Turkmenistan and the east of the steppes and all that.
Yeah.
So, all right, what else we have?
The Great Pyramid was older to the Romans. In other words, the time from the Great Pyramid to the Romans was more than the time from the Romans to us.
Yeah, that's a good timeline there, because you think I don't know, it's all old stuff.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you're like, all right, Cleopatra, that's Romans. Yeah. She's Egypt, that's pyramids.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. But the Great Pyramid was there. I mean, it depends on what your timeline is for the Bible, but the Great Pyramid was there a long time before the Exodus from Egypt.
Yeah,
and that's way back.
Yeah,
yeah. So I mean, the Great Pyramid was what?
Right. So you're right. So you think that the Romans would have looked at the pyramids as somewhat contemporary to them, but for them, that's ancient history.
Yeah, right. That was way back.
That's way
Thousands
back.
In
the same way that we look at the Romans as way back.
Yeah,
I like that one.
Yeah,
too.
That's a good one.
All right, what do you got here? Number 11.
That's weird. Nintendo was founded when Jack the Ripper was still on the loose and when the Eiffel Tower was opened. 1889. Nintendo?
What was it doing before it was making video games in the 80s?
Actually, I read about this in a different context.
So
they were a completely different kind of a company. They made something radically different, but I can't remember what it was.
Right. And then just the company hung around and
they shifted over to video games at some later point.
100 years later, it was doing something successful for 100 years.
Yeah, but they were,
but also just has that kind of a the gamey sound to it.
Well, it's like, Nintendo, it's so associated in your mind.
Yes. You're like, well, what, didn't that sound as like a weird name in 1889?
Yeah, they started off. It's killing me that I can't remember what it was, because I just wrote about this in an article a little while ago. That Nintendo started off doing some completely different, like making bricks, or something something completely different from doing games.
Right. Well, I mean, the Japanese companies are such diverse conglomerates.
Yeah.
Right. Like you think of. When my first thought of Mitsubishi was like stereo equipment.
Yeah.
But they made the fighter jets during, and they make everything.
Yeah.
Like you get one massive company, and they're just diversify all over the place.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go to space.
Okay.
A day on Venus is longer than a year on Venus.
Yeah, it's pretty strange, isn't it?
Okay, so what's the numbers here?
So it takes 243 Earth days for Venus to rotate once, but only 225 Earth days to orbit the Sun.
All right, so let's just forget about the weird atmosphere. Let's just say the Earth is doing that.
Right.
So one side of the planet, you're seeing day.
Yeah.
For almost a year before the people on the other side get their chance.
Well, half a year. Half a year and then night for half a year. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yes.
So you're basically, like if it's happening on Earth, that would mean like from, let's just say from the summer or spring and summer would be daytime.
Yeah.
And then fall and winter would be nighttime.
Yeah. Yes. And I wonder how much cross-planet tourism there would be. You're like, all right, honey and the kids, I've already done 3 months. Think
how radically different society would be. What was that? We read like a Heinlein story or something where it was something like that. There were a bunch of different suns and.
That was one of the Asimovs.
That was Asimov. Okay, yeah, but it's we take it for granted that the days and the years are the way they are for us, but other planets are just very different. And
when we did this show about the moon, we talked about the stabilization of the moon. Mm-hmm. The idea of projecting, well, there's so many planets out there. Some of them must have life, and yes, those numbers add up to there must be. But the conditions are so unique that even the wobble of the planet would have made life difficult to develop. Can you imagine life developing under those conditions?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Can you imagine, what kind of plants? Could you have?
It could be in darkness for
yes, and then
right for 6 months. Yeah, Yeah, I mean, it's so that whole question of trying to figure out how it's possible for life to develop other places. I mean, the problem is we have an example of one.
How many data points are you working with here?
Right, we have one planet where we don't even know exactly what happened here.
Yeah.
But we know a fair amount about what happened here, and you're supposed to say, "Oh, how would it happen? How would we know? It's so."
Yeah. So
who knows what variety is
right?
possible?
Because even if our exoplanets, we're talking about the Goldilocks zone. We're right. So we only have our own point of reference. But even then, you don't know what about the rotations of the planets and the wobble and
I was reading recently that plate tectonics might be necessary for life.
Huh.
Which is weird. But I mean, even on our own planet, every once in a while they find life in a very strange place.
Yeah.
Like at the bottom of the ocean next to a vent of, a volcanic vent.
Right. An animal perfectly fine with pressure that would just crush an elephant,
and really hot water, it's bizarre.
So who's to say that?
Who's to say what? Yeah,
if it's got an atmosphere of sulfur. Like, well, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe they like that.
Somebody likes that.
That's right. So humans made it to the moon. This one is amazing.
All right, humans
made it to the moon only 66 years after the Wright brothers successfully performed a controlled human flight.
That is remarkable.
Yeah.
I mean, has there... So what do we talk about here? So we're doing less than... What did they say? 66 years. So and you think of another 66 years... What would 66 years ago be from today? From the 40s, right?
Yeah.
The 60s.
60s.
So the 60s.
Yeah. Has anything developed in anywhere near that? Well, computers, internet, all that.
Yeah. But is it as radical?
Well, I don't know.
It would be hard to qualify exactly, but it just seems to me that the recent most 60 years can't be as technologically.
Well, I don't know. I mean, because they're very different kinds of things. Like flight is a very engineering kind of thing where somebody tinkering in their garage can come up with a cool new thing, And even the early space rocket ships, they were doing this stuff with slide rules,
right?
I mean, they weren't relying on super fancy computers, so it was a very practical engineering thing where computers and computer chips and programming languages and all that kind of stuff, that's a different level, different type of engineering.
Yeah. I mean, I guess because takes place on a physically a small scale.
Yeah, it's hard to picture.
Yes. Yeah, it seems the other one seems more impressive, but maybe not. But
I don't know.
As far as how life has been changed on Earth, the fact that you can, immediately communicate with anybody anywhere on the planet.
I know.
Is that a bigger deal than flying to the moon?
I don't know. It's pretty astonishing. Both of them were pretty astonishing. Yeah. The Ottoman Empire was still around when Walt Disney released his first cartoons.
Again, so back to the Byzantine Empire.
Yeah.
So Constantinople falls to the Ottoman Empire in the 1400s,
right?
And Vlad the Impaler, and all those. So that's kind of what I associate the Ottoman Empire with. Although
it lasted right up until
World War I,
right?
So that's how we got the Middle East looks the way that it does, because the Ottoman Empire was still controlling things. But I still think of Mehmed the Magnificent or whatever when I think of Ottoman Empire, turbans and horses. And stuff.
You don't
say, so what is it? Oh, Walt Disney.
Walt Disney. First animated cartoons, which would have been Steamboat Willie or something like that.
Willie.
Yeah.
Okay, how about you go back to the dinosaurs?
Oh, yeah. You can fit all of human history and then some between the periods when the Stegosaurus and T-Rex existed.
Right, which is just so easy just to think of the dinosaur age.
Yeah, right. Yes, but it was 600 million years or so. I didn't want not 600. Sorry,
that might be wrong. I mean, it's just these.
No, 600 million years takes us back to the Precambrian and all that stuff.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So the Stegosaurus
Jurassic, Cretaceous,
Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, all that. Yeah, Stegosaurus lived around 150 million years ago. The T-Rex didn't appear until the last leg of the late Cretaceous, some 68 million years ago. So. Stegosaurus 150, T-Rex 68 million. All of human history.
This is not even close, really. I mean, all of human history is
like 5,000 years or something. I mean,
right. Well, even if you went to, I don't know what Lucy. What is Lucy? 2 million?
Oh, but that's So
that would be the earliest.
It depends on what you mean by history.
Yeah.
Because if you mean how long have humans been around, then like if you mean Homo sapiens, then like maybe 500,000 years. But if you go back to like something like Lucy, then you're talking about 2.4 million, something like that.
There's still a blip.
Yeah. Usually history has to do with writing, though, doesn't it? Well, that's why I was thinking 5,000, right. Because there's not much writing before.
Yes, but in our current human form, I think we're talking about 200,000, maybe?
Yeah, something like that.
And then, so Lucy is 2 million. I guess all we're talking about then is bipedal monkeys, really. And even that is... So these three periods that you were talking about, does that mean that were there extinction events between them?
Yeah. There were extinction events between... So a lot of the geologic ages are distinguished because of some great big change that happened from one to the other. So some of them are extinction events and other kinds of changes like that. Yeah.
All right. Let's do one more Egypt.
Now, Cleopatra, everybody thinks of Cleopatra as being an Egyptian. Yeah. She's actually a Greek. She was a Macedonian Greek.
Yes. So apparently Alexander the Great was the Great.
Yeah.
And things just sort of like when Genghis Khan died.
Yeah.
The whole thing fell apart.
Right.
So when Alexander the Great died, his empire was divided up, right? Yeah. Amongst his generals and kids, and so one of them went to the Ptolemaic dynasty was the ones that were in Egypt, and so it was ruled by people. So from Alexander the Great to Cleopatra, none of the ruling class even spoke Egyptian. Like that was she was like the woman of the people. So they were all. So
supposedly she styled herself as a goddess and associated herself with Isis, and she represented a blending of Greek and Egyptian traditions.
Right. Oh, hold on. But what's our juxtaposition here?
Yeah. Cleopatra ruled Egypt closer in time to the invention of the iPhone than to the construction of the Great Pyramids at Giza.
Well, that's similar to the other one. It's similar to the other one. Yeah. Yes, the gap between what we think of as Egypt being super old.
Yeah.
Here's.
I love this photo of Cleopatra that somebody found. She's quite an attractive woman.
Yes, and probably, she's probably which looks more like that than.
So I think somebody took that picture on an iPhone.
yeah, I did. It is part of it in the description.
That's right.
So maybe.
It's clearly AI generated.
So anyway, there's that. I don't know. I just ran across that somewhere. I thought that would be kind of fun.
It's pretty fun, interesting.
If you're a fan of history, then you're still going to go, gosh.
That's kind of weird.
Wouldn't associate those two things together.
Sometimes it's interesting just to compare two things and contrast them. So I have a couple of letters to the editor that I wanted to talk about. The first one was about the DC architecture show that we did a little while ago. And these are both from our faithful listener, JR. He says, my wife asked me, how can you do an architecture tour on a podcast?
Okay, legitimate question.
Yeah, I said you can if you do it the way PNC did, by infusing the discussion with history, culture, and first-hand impressions. I felt I was there along with you. Well done, one of my most enjoyable to date.
What do you know?
I know, was very interesting. And then on the Christmas podcast, this Jewish listener...
History of Christmas?
The one. This Jewish listener thoroughly enjoyed this podcast, learning a lot. I didn't know about the holidays as traditions and customs. Well done. Coincidentally, this was only the 4th time in the last century that Christmas and the first night of Hanukkah fell on the same day.
Oh, good. We got he gave us a little Jewish connection.
A little Jewish connection there.
Very
and
nice.
Then I like this. Happy 2025 to the boys, and I expect even better in the new year.
All right,
so
well,
there we go.
We'll do our
we'll
best.
do our best. Give it a try. All right.
Cheers. Weird history.
Thanks so much for listening to Beer and Conversation with Pigweed and Crowhill. Remember to visit us at pigweedandcrowhill.com or send us an email at pigweedshow@gmail.com.